I actually hit perimenopause at the same time as qualifying as this personal trainer, who then went on to social media just to help people keep moving during the pandemic twice a day. And I started getting all these, pretty wacky symptoms, from like brain fog to a little bit of anxiety, which I'd never ever experienced before. To obviously, when your menstrual cycle is all over the place, the hormones are out of whack. It can affect your self-esteem, your mood. It affects everyone around you. And I just put it down to stress. I just thought, I'm doing new things. I'm out of my comfort zone. I'm on Instagram and Zoom and YouTube and, all these platforms where I was not planning on being a public facing person. But I've always been very genuine. And I was saying, before some of my lives as well, I was saying to this community that suddenly started growing and joining us every day that, I was feeling really anxious before I got on here. But, after this just 10-minute exercise snack that we did out in the garden and had a bit of fun, I used to publicly just say, like, thank you guys, because I feel so much better now. And you've really helped me. And I didn't join the dots with perimenopause up until, only 2 years ago. And it was just from a documentary that was out in the UK on Channel 4. And they showed the changes in the brain. And when they showed, it's actually Dr. Mosconi, who's a US doctor who you may have heard of. And she showed the changes in the brain that happened to a female during this perimenopause time. And obviously she researches a lot about Alzheimer's. And the kids were fed up of saying to me, even my husband, Lavina, I've told you this. Like, how come you can't remember things, write things down? And it was a bit worrying when I was meeting people and you suddenly you forget their name, or you've forgotten like short-term memories. And it broke me to tears, Scott. I literally was crying. And you talk about soccer, the boys would never switch off their football, as we call it in the UK. They were watching a Liverpool match, so it's their team. And there was me crying so loud that they actually switched it off downstairs, came up, rushed up, and they were like, what's happened? What's happened? And they just sat in bed with me, like holding my hand. I was sobbing away. And I said, look, I just want you to watch this with me. So we rewound, and they both, they sat with me, which was pretty amazing. And it's like the penny dropped. I was like, I'm in perimenopause. So I went on social media the next morning in tears saying, I'm in perimenopause. And people were like, what does that mean? What is it? And I said, I've only discovered it. It could be 10 years for any woman, but not that all women will even have symptoms. It's like 1 in 4, I think, may have debilitating symptoms. 1 in 4 may have no symptoms at all. But it was just more that I realized, I've got to be in tune with my body, and there are things that are going on. It's justified. So I've obviously been sharing this for the last sort of 2 years. And now there's been this sort of menopausal revolution, I think, especially in the UK and the US. And you just think, gosh, where were we before this? Like, just as a man, for you, like for me to be able to share this on your platform, I want men to be part of this conversation, because whether it's your wife, whether it's your daughter, your mum, your colleague, your friends, you're all going to have women in your lives. And it's just like a conversation, just like puberty. Like, we just got to all understand that this is a phase that women will go through and hopefully thrive. I want to be very positive about it, because I have done loads during this period. Even though I've had the symptoms, the book is all about how we can navigate these symptoms through lifestyle changes and through exercise. And I truly believe, those are just like fundamental in terms of feeling good.
Yeah, well, excuse me, I am not uncomfortable with these topics because
Oh,
I
good.
grew up in a household where I'm the oldest grandson in an Italian Catholic family.
Oh,
I had
yeah.
5 aunts that were
Wow.
surrounding my life. My mom and all of her sisters were all teenagers growing up, and we'd be at the beach, and I was the only young boy. I listened to everything. And when I got to college, I was having conversations and teaching so many of my friends things that they had no idea about, mainly because they just hadn't been surrounded by it. And so
By women,
I'm
yeah.
very intrigued with the conversation of perimenopause, because having a spouse that is in her 40s, that's
Mm-hmm.
extremely athletic, that's also busy, we as
Mm.
husbands and men in general, the more we know about it, the more receptive we can be, the more helpful we can be. And it's also challenging because if there's hormonal changes or mood changes or forgetfulness, these are things that are challenging with the people that you love the most.
Totally.
And your patience level is usually the least with the people that you
Yes,
love the most. So
exactly.
it's because it's very natural. You're going from a similar state where you're both the same for all these years, and then there's a
Mm.
differential that changes. And I can understand that that could be a major challenge, and how to be better at it. How are you advising the men? How have you and your husband go through this together? Like, what are some of the things that you've done that could help other men through that process, not just the women that are listening and becoming aware?
Yeah, I mean, this is such an important conversation. So thank you for being so open to talk about it. I think like when I research the book, especially, and I look at the statistics around divorce rates and the amount of midlife women that are filing for divorce, so it affects relationships. If you think about, having teenage, potentially children in the house, and they've got these roller coaster of hormones going on in their lives, and then you have mum also going through them, and then you look at, mental health. I think it said that 9 out of 10 women in the study that I quoted in the book have mental health issues during the menopause. And that could be anything from like mood changes to severe depression. And I think a few years ago, a lot of women used to just go to the doctors and the first thing they were prescribed would be antidepressants, because obviously doctors were also not trained. It's not their fault, but this whole area of women's health has just never been covered enough. There's not been enough research, let alone enough representation in the research, because menopause can also change between ethnicity as well. So being South Asian, I'm very vocal about, I'm part of this menopause mandate group here in the UK, which is a campaigning group with a lot of big names, celebrities, famous faces that are all trying to share their message. And for me, it's having someone that looks like me for the South Asian community, and to know that as a South Asian woman, I can go through menopause 5 or 6 years earlier than the average white female. So here they say, the average age for a white female is 51, and that's when you've had no periods for a year. It's almost like a point in time, the menopause. And then you have the perimenopause, like I was explaining, it could be a decade before. But being a South Asian woman, I could be starting that maybe in my mid 30s, late 30s. So there's definitely differences to highlight. I think, this whole conversation, I go into workplaces as well to talk about the menopause, because you could have a male boss. And I can imagine it's pretty difficult even for that male boss to know what to say and how to act. So there's lots of different, training that's going on, especially in the UK here. And I always try and bring out the things that we can do, obviously, in terms of our own, what's in our hands, right? Like all these free tools. I've got 80 free tools in this book where it's about taking simple changes to your lifestyle. It can be the exercise, snacking. It could be going out in nature. I've done a lot of research about the power of nature. It could be breath work, which I think is so amazing. And that's the biggest tool, I've used before, like big podcasts, interviews, anything I'm doing where I may just be feeling that I'm in that fight or flight mode and I need to reset my nervous system and just calm the body and mind. Even a minute is all it can take sometimes to do some of those deep breathing practices, to obviously like self-care, to sleep, food, like it all comes together, I feel. But for men, my husband and I probably did our most vulnerable live ever. And it's one that I just can't watch back. And, it's buried in there in my Instagram. But it was the one where he was reluctant at first to talk about the menopause, he was just thinking, well, I said to him, Mena, will you please come on with me? Because I think not only are men not in this conversation, South Asian men are just nowhere near this conversation because they've never really talked about it. And he was hesitant at first. And then when I kind of persuaded him and said, like, I think it's going to help people if we just talk openly about some of the challenges that we've had. But Scott, he completely then like warmed up to the camera and he gave so much away that I was like sitting there thinking, oh my God, like he was, quite very open about the fact that we went to like therapy, which I had never shared before. Like mental health is another one of those taboo subjects in my community where, especially men's mental health, I think that's a huge thing. But even for couples to say that there's something wrong and that they've gone to seek help, like I think everyone should have therapy. That's my outlook, but I know it's not talked about enough over here with South Asians. So when he came out and said, it was really challenging on our relationship and we worked at it, and I guess it's awareness. It's like having this education. I've told men to read my book because it will give them an insight on what is going on in a female's body. Like I've done it by sort of mood as well. Like there's a mood menu at the back that anyone could use, like from, I'll just show you the book. It's kind of like, it's a very easy read. So when I say to men, please read it, they're like, I don't read books. And I say, no, this is literally big font. It's like a guide. It's not like a heavy read, but it's got a lot of basic terminology and science around what we can do. And then this mood menu at the back, I feel is something that we can probably all relate to. So I've done like low mood, anxious and overwhelmed, unproductive, if you've been sitting too long, feeling bloated. And it just gives you a whole load of different snacks based on time. It can be as short as a minute to 10 minutes. But I think men, I guess what I would love them to do is just be there as, and try and like just pay an interest, right, into the female's perspective in their lives. Be there just sometimes just to listen. And I think when you realize that estrogen levels are dropping, hormones are changing, it could be affecting her sleep, it's affecting her mood. Like every day is quite different. And I'm very open now. The boys know all about when mum's having a peri day, as we call it. And it may be a little bit of light-hearted fun, but it sometimes just breaks the atmosphere. And they realize, okay, mum is like struggling a little bit today, or just give me a little bit of time. Yes, I have forgotten. I will write it down again. It's like an education and a process for all of us, because like you say, we are going to take it out on our loved ones, unfortunately. But if we can all just pay an interest and understanding, which I think, you're great because you've been surrounded by women all your lives. Did you remember any of your aunts like talking about menopause out of interest, or?
No, I mainly just remember the hot flashes and how like just any level of the probably the most annoying thing for somebody like it for me when I'm riding in the car with my wife, she has to have air on her at all times and our whole car is freezing. And it doesn't matter what anybody else is feeling in the car.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this a lot because my boys will be like, you and mom bicker about the air conditioning. It's the second time I've talked about it today, but it's no joke. It's so funny because I'm so aware of everyone else in the car that I'm an advocate, right? And so I'm like trying to make it the comfortable temperature. And then she's like, if I want air, I want air. And so we're going through and that's, I remember my mom doing that. I remember her mom doing that. I remember, and it was a lot easier to accept when it's your mother, your mother-in-law, when it's your wife and you're all in the car. And especially it's very hard I know it's hard for women that have only boys because there's also a lack of, like your husband, when he opened up, the challenge that men have is we're either in or we're out. We don't go halfway. So if you want us to be in, we're going to go all in and we're going to say more than you wanted us to say. And then you're going to be super uncomfortable with us. And then we think we went too far. And so, and then the other side to
Can't
that is,
win for you.
no,
I'm
we can't.
sorry.
No, it's not poor. And I don't mean it to be
No,
poor men. I just
no,
mean
I'm
that I
joking.
think our goal is to be a
Mm,
protector. And so the
yes.
other side that you mentioned is that it's helpful to just sit there and listen. We struggle with just sitting and listening. We are action
Mm,
oriented. All men want to
yeah.
solve your problems.
Yeah.
We are
You're right.
your protector, your provider. If
Yeah.
a good man should be doing these things for his wife. And so in our minds, we also know that there's many times in your life where you've listened to us and it's been very positive because
Mm,
we've had to push you out of a comfort zone that you
mm,
wouldn't, just like you do us in lots of settings.
yeah.
But when it
Yeah.
comes to something that becomes emotional and it's
Yeah.
internal, there doesn't seem to be a win. And so it's challenging to communicate. If we say, hey, we've noticed that your mood is changing and it's substantial and we want to help, how do we help? That's not always going to be received very well. And
Yeah.
so I think it's a journey like marriage. And I love that
It
you
is.
mentioned, therapy, coaching. I think sometimes just having other couples around to talk through some of your challenges.
I was just going to say,
The
social connection is
Yeah.
huge. You know, like of all the things that I look at, obviously I'm, a big promoter advocate for movement and exercise, but it was social connection that the science is pointing at as the biggest thing for a happy, healthy life, for our longevity. And I'm all about, how we future proof our bodies, how we remain independent, healthy, happy, not just physically, but, you know, I'm sure, I did a live with Dan Butner, who you obviously know very well, in the US, about his blue zones. And it is that whole sense of community. And I saw that with even in the pandemic when I started doing the lives, and I do them then with my mother-in-law because I was feeling so sad about the elderly being left out. And South Asian elderly people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s they've probably never exercised or ever lifted weights or done, like squats and press ups and shoulder presses and things like that. But I got them all joining in and I couldn't believe the response. But it was more, I think, the community. And that's why I've carried it on every Friday, like they're all on my YouTube channel and we go live and we have this Zoom community that all turn up and we talk to them at the end. And it's that talking. There was like a 74-year-old lady on there that comes every week. And when she saw that I started talking about menopause, she opened up about her menopause. And then I saw this ripple effect, which I see with, when I'm just observing people. And another lady then talked about it. And then a husband talked about it and said, I've got daughters and I'm going to probably, get them to just start following you, Lavina, or like just paying an interest. I just thought for an Indian man in his like late 70s to even pay that interest is such a big win. But yeah, social connection. Like I feel, when we did that live, so many of our friends, we were just like blown away. They were like, some of my husband's friends, closest friends, said, I think you've saved my marriage. Like he heard that from about three like guys saying, I actually had no idea that this is what's happening to my wife. And obviously it causes, so many arguments, so many situations where if you just don't even understand what's going on, it's inexplainable, right? So I think we're making progress, just knowing awareness around women's health and menopause is like the biggest thing. But I think it is still a journey, and, surround yourself with people that you can share it with, because I'm sure if you talk to one of your friends, they're probably going through the same thing. My husband can sympathize with you because I used to be the coldest person on the planet. And now our room is like an ice bucket at night. The windows are open. I'm like trying to throw off. I've got cooling blanket, pillow, and all this stuff. And actually, hot flushes are things that I've only just started experiencing. In fact, the studies here are showing that hot flushes are like the old wives' tale of that's what menopause is. But actually, things like anxiety and mood changes are coming up higher as more common symptoms. You get things like hair loss, like low libido, like joint pains. That's like, there's so many barriers to sometimes even having that motivation to move and to exercise. So I'm trying to reframe how just even like a minute, if you just get out for like what I call a feel good walk in nature, that can help potentially banish some of the mood, increase your energy, like just start making you feel a bit less brain foggy, that cotton wool brain. And there's science that's backing it, which is great, but it's getting these messages out there, right?
If you like clips like this, I have a similar clip here. And if you want to watch the full video, click here.